Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
Crash landing. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of jade and slate moments ago. Elena had been immersed in patient files, the thrum of the helicopter blades a monotonous drone. Then, a savage jolt tore through the airframe, slamming her against the far bulkhead. Metal shrieked in protest, glass exploded, and the emerald labyrinth of the jungle hurtled towards them with terrifying velocity. Elena's final, lucid thought echoed, "This can't be real." Then, oblivion, consciousness returned with the biting tang of aviation fuel and crushed foliage. A relentless throb hammered behind her eyes. The helicopter resembled a metallic origami nightmare, half submerged in the dense undergrowth. With a groan, she levered herself upright, a lance of agony piercing her left arm. Something was definitely amiss. "Hello?" she rasped, her voice raw. "Is anyone there?" A faint whimper drifted back. Elena lurched towards the sound, disregarding the body's complaints. Dr. Ramirez was slumped, ashen-faced. A crimson mask painted across his features. A shard of metal jutted from his shoulder. Beside him, young Anya lay motionless, her head resting against the fractured window. The pilot? Elena forced herself to look away from the pilot. "Ramirez? Can you hear me?" A gentle shake to his shoulder. Another groan, his eyelids flickering. "Elena, what happened?" "We went down," she stated, the obvious hanging heavy in the air. "Lie still. Let me assess you." Ignoring the crescendo of her own pain, Elena performed a rapid triage on Ramirez. The shrapnel wound looked ghastly, yet seemed to have spared any vital structures. Anya remained unresponsive. Though her breathing appeared regular, Elena meticulously palpated her limbs for fractures. Nothing immediately obvious, but vigilance was paramount. "Anya's out cold," Elena reported, her voice strained. "Ramirez, stay with me." "Can you do that?" I think so," he muttered, cradling his injured shoulder. "What about you? You all right?" Elena cast a cursory glance at her arm, broken, without a doubt. "I'll manage. Our priority is escape and contacting base." She began ransacking the wreckage, desperate for the emergency kit. Miraculously, it survived. Elena improvised a splint for her arm using cardboard and bandages, before turning her attention to Ramirez's injury. She cleansed the wound with antiseptic wipes and applied a makeshift pressure bandage to staunch the bleeding. "Right, Ramirez," she said, her tone resolute. "I need your help extracting Anya. Can you assist?" Together, they gingerly freed the unconscious nurse and laid her carefully upon a bed of woven fronds and leaves. Elena rechecked her vitals, still stable, yet she needed urgent, specialized care. Now, the radio.it had to be functional. Elena crawled back into the mangled cockpit, her hopes plummeting as she surveyed the mangled state of the communication gear. It was a jumbled knot of severed wires and shattered components. Nevertheless, she had to try. Her fingers danced over the controls, frantically hunting for a signal. Static hissed from the speaker, then silence. She tweaked the frequency, her fingers trembling with mounting frustration. More static. "Come on," she whispered, her voice a breath. Someone has to be listening. After what stretched into an eternity, she conceded defeat. The radio was defunct. They were utterly isolated. Elena slumped against the broken seat, fatigue a crushing weight. Stranded in the heart of the Colombian jungle, devoid of communication, burdened with a fractured arm and 2 injured companions. The jungle pressed in, the symphony of unseen insects and creatures amplifying the profound isolation. She squeezed her eyes shut, battling the rising tide of despair. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her team relied on her. Their lives rested on her shoulders. Taking a steadying breath, Elena forced laser-like focus, and inventory of resources was crucial. Food, water, medical provisions, securing a freshwater source and erecting a shelter were next on the list, and devising a method to signal for rescue. Her eyes snapped open, sweeping the wreckage. There had to be something salvageable. A mirror, a flare. Anything. "Ramirez," she announced, her voice recovering its strength. "Help me assess our inventory. We're getting through this. We have to." A spark of hope ignited in his eyes. Good hope was a potent weapon, and they were going to require every advantage they could muster to survive. This jungle, she knew, offered no quarter, and somehow, she sensed their ordeal had only just begun. The serpent's shadow. El Serpiente smoothed a manicured thumb along the sharp edge of his obsidian desk, a surprisingly refined motion from a man steeped in brutality. The air in his repurposed hacienda office, which commanded a view of the jade-green valley, vibrated with the hum of a generator and the contained menace of his enforcers, Raphael. His jittery second stood before him, candlelight glinting in eyes perpetually wide with apprehension. A plane went down, you claim? Near the old silver mines. El Serpiente's voice, a dry rustle, barely stirred the humid air. Raphael's swallow echoed in the sudden stillness. Yes, patron. The locals heard it. A small aircraft. Likely carrying tourists, perhaps. El Serpiente tented his fingers, a glint of avarice sharpening his gaze. Tourists were irritants, but the mines, strategically crucial. Dominating them meant controlling the mountain passes. He'd neglected them for months, letting the cocaine flow unseen through their dark veins. This could upset everything. Occupants. Survivors, patron. They say doctors. A medical team, it seems. White coats were mentioned. A thin, predatory smile etched itself onto El Serpiente's lips. Doctors. Now that held promise, leverage. The capital's government, corrupt though it was, still postured about rural healthcare. Holding healers hostage could buy time, stifle gossip about his endeavors. Seize them, Raphael. Alive. Untouched. Bring them here. I wish to meet these paragons of mercy. He paused, letting the command settle. And Raphael? Ensure absolute discretion. No police, no army. Only us. Comprehend. Raphael's Adam's apple bobbed violently. See, patron did a tea once. He all but bolted from the room, leaving behind the faint, acrid tang of his fear. El Serpiente pushed himself up from the desk, the scent of imported cologne mingling with the persistent, earthy rot of the jungle. He moved to the window, his gaze encompassing the valley, his asterisk valley, carved from the jungle's indifference and the government's neglect, forged with blood and bullets that he wouldn't permit some downed aircraft to jeopardize his dominion. Meanwhile, life in the village of Santa Maria ticked on with weary resignation beneath the serpent's shadow. Dust devils pirouette in the plaza, swirling around the feet of children engaged in a hushed game of tag. Their laughter, muted and joyless, the carefree spirit of youth conspicuously absent, died abruptly at the rumble of a truck. Maria, her face a map of weathered canyons, sat on her porch, deftly weaving a basket. Her gnarled fingers worked with ingrained skill, but her gaze remained fixed on the approaching road. Each engine's growl sent a prickle of dread through her, a familiar tightening in her chest. Two men in faded camouflage, their faces obscured by bandanas, sauntered into the plaza. They brandished automatic rifles, steel flashing under the fierce sun. One spat, a gesture of casual dominance. The children froze, their playful sounds extinguished. Maria bowed her head, her fingers now trembling almost imperceptibly. Anything to report? The lead man rasped, his voice thick with arrogance. A youth, scarcely more than a boy, scurried forward, eyes downcast. No, senor. All is quiet. The second man chuckled. A low, menacing rumble. Quiet is wise. Quiet means obedience. Remember that, boy. Disobedience carries a price. He patted his rifle. We have ways of ensuring comprehension. They resumed their patrol, their presence a suffocating shroud over the village. Maria followed them with her eyes, her spirit burdened with despair. They were specters, these men, constant reminders of the serpent whose coils constricted their lives. Crushing all hope, she closed her eyes, muttering a silent, desperate prayer for salvation. A plea that might never be heard. The dust calmed, but the serpent's aura remained. The very air hung heavy with apprehension. The hermit. Condensation beaded on the palm frond roof, a relentless drip marking the humid stillness. He fidgeted on the hard bench, the woven seat chafing his skin. The jungle pulsed outside, a vibrant chorus of buzzing and croaking that, paradoxically, offered solace against the hollow silence he carried within. Weeks had passed without a word spoken, since the last meager offering, a dented tin, a corroded blade, from the unseen benefactor who had sustained him these 5 years. Enough to survive. The wilderness sustained him. Memory tormented that he uncoiled. The air thick with the musk of earth and rot, he crossed the small space to a rough target carved into the trunk of a colossal kapok. Sunlight glinted on the honed edge of the army knife in his hand. He shut his eyes, a deep breath fighting back the encroaching tide of remembrance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Shrieks echoing in a dust storm. The iron taste of fear, her face, a mask of terror, eyes wide with disbelief. The blast tore through the bazaar. A white-hot instant followed by an unbearable void. He'd been too slow then. Too slow always, his fist clenched. The memory a visceral wound. Aleppo. That day cleaved his life in two. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Eyes open, he let the anger burn. A controlled flame. Focus. The knife flew. A silver streak against emerald. Biting deep into the target's center, he pulled it free. The steel a cold comfort against his palm. Again, and again, each throw, a prayer. His rage channeled into precision at a rising tempo blurred the blade. Each strike exact. Sweat slicked his hair. He diversified his assault. Sweeping cuts, mirroring blade work, swift thrusts, serpentine in their speed. His body flowed, a deadly ballet. Refined by years of training and scarred by unhealed wounds, he was a phantom in the undergrowth. A silent harbinger. He paused, lungs heaving. The air a burning draft, sensed, rather than saw, eyes upon him, animal, not human, curious caution. He ignored them. He was no threat, merely another element. Later, by the small fire, flickering shadows danced across his weathered face. He ate dried fruit, each chew measured, deliberate. The sunset blazed, a riot of color across the sky. Beautiful, uncaring. He watched the light bleed away, the darkness advancing. They would come. Inevitable. He'd heard the echoes on the wind. A cartel tightening its grip, outsiders pushing into the verdant domain. He'd evaded entanglement for years, a forgotten man swallowed by the jungle's embrace. But the jungle always exacted its due. A familiar ache bloomed in his chest, yearning for what was forever lost. And oh hero, just a man consumed by his past. Adrift in a world he no longer recognized. Even specters, though, could be deadly. He rose, gaze locked on the growing dark. His solitude, he sensed, was nearing its end. A plea for help. Whirlwinds of dust mimicked the tempest raging in Mateo Morales' soul. 2 days he'd walked, throat raspy as dried leaves. His soul's raw wounds. 48 hours since Essay's bloody cough, since fever had begun to steal the light from her young eyes. Rumors had whispered of a gringo, dwelling deep in the jungle's embrace. A man touched by both shadow and skill, a slim hope, yet Essay represented his everything. He discovered him eventually. In a clearing choked with weeds. A rickety shack, faith and vines the only discernible construction materials, formed Statham's dwelling. The man himself was wiry, etched with time. His gaze holding shadows Mateo couldn't comprehend. He split wood with savage precision, each blow echoing like a thunderclap. Mateo lurched forward, collapsing at the man's feet. "Senor, please, you must offer aid." Statham halted, axe poised. No hand offered to raise Mateo. "I offer succor to no one." His voice was gravel etched in granite. Mateo swallowed, disregarding the ache in his knees. "My daughter, Essay, gravely ill. The healers, they have vanished." The final word caught in his throat. The image of armed men dragging the doctors away, faces taut with terror, burned fresh in his memory. Statham resumed his labor, each strike measured and forceful. "Vanished to where? Taken. By the enforcers, the puppeteers of this land." Mateo's tone barely registered above a breath. He wouldn't name the cartel, even here in isolation. Their reach was insidious, their retribution absolute. "And you suppose I possess a solution?" Cynicism dripped from Statham's inflection. "I conjure no miracles. No, senor. But strength emanates from you. You are distinct." Mateo's gaze implored. "Those healers, virtuous souls, they came to heal us, to mend us, Now, they are gone, and my Isa, she will perish without them. Statham paused once more, lodging the axe into the block with a heavy thunk that he scrutinized Mateo. His expression inscrutable, he beheld tattered clothing, dirt-caked skin, the stark terror gleaming in the man's eyes that he glimpsed a ghost of a life he had desperately tried to bury, a life where humanity was helpless and hope a cruel charade. Return home, Statham decreed, his tone devoid of warmth. My aid is beyond your reach. Mateo's frame sagged that he appeared defeated, stripped bare by despair's cold hand. Yet, he straightened, a flicker of defiance igniting in his gaze. I will depart only with your help, that I shall remain here until you concede. He settled onto the earth, a resolute statue carved from grief. Statham glared, then muttered a curse that he seized a skin filled with water and tossed it to Mateo. Very well, stay, but anticipate no change of heart. The hours crawled by, the jungle teeming with unseen life's symphony. Mateo remained a study in silence, his gaze riveted to the soil as twilight began to descend, daubing the sky with shades of flame and violet. Statham yielded. Lead me to your daughter, he said, reluctance permeating his voice. Mateo sprang to his feet, hope surging through him. They traversed in silence, the jungle's sounds amplifying the tension between them. Upon entering Mateo's village, the atmosphere was heavy with the cloying scent of wood smoke and dread. Mateo guided Statham to a meager dwelling, its walls fashioned from mud and thatch inside. A small form lay inert upon a woven mat as her complexion was ashen, her breathing shallow gasps. A moistened cloth rested upon her brow, her obsidian hair, typically alive with youthful vigor, hung lifeless and dull. Statham knelt, calloused fingers testing her forehead. The fire within raged. He fixed his gaze upon Mateo, a flicker of what might be concern within his eyes. What prognosis did the healers offer? Mateo wrung his hands. They spoke of infection's grip, medicines they possessed. Alas. His words trailed off, thick with unshed tears. Statham regarded Isa anew, her innocent features, the tattered doll clutched tightly in her small hand. He envisioned the captured healers, helpless. He considered all the villagers, living under fear's oppressive thumb, their lives dictated by the whims of merciless men. Something stirred within him, a dormant ember awakening. He rose, his jaw a rigid line. I require water, unsoiled cloths, and every substance you consider medicinal. He turned to Mateo, his gaze unwavering. Then we shall assess what can be salvaged. The true battle had yet to begin. For the first time in years, Jason Statham felt a stirring of purpose, a reason to wield the abilities he had tried to suppress. He knew not what he would do, only that he could not stand idly by as Isa was consumed, and perhaps, he could engineer a way to rescue those healers. The shadow in his eyes had yet to recede, but a spark of something hitherto unknown ignited within. Gears in motion. Fine, Statham conceded. The word a grudging exhale. He shoved away from the table, the chair legs screeching against the concrete floor of the safe house. Am I end at my rules, my show? Isabel, the desperate coordinator who'd sought him out, offered no argument. A wave of serenity softened her features, diminishing the etched lines of anxiety around her eyes. Anything. Just bring them home. He needed intel, a deluge of it. El Serpiente, the cartel kingpin, his fortress, his soldiers, their habits, their vulnerabilities. Isabel supplied what she had. Blurred satellite snaps, eavesdropped radio transmissions, the names and specializations of the captured physicians, a mere trickle compared to the flood required. For 2 days, Statham immersed himself in the digital abyss. He reactivated dormant connections, calling in debts from the internet's back alleys. Faces unseen for years, flickered onto encrypted screens, offering scraps of data, rumors, whispers of El Serpiente's ruthlessness and paranoia. He unearthed the cartel's supply chains, the whereabouts of hidden arms caches, the layout of the compound, a sprawling citadel hewn from the jungle hillside, fortified by electrified fences and vigilant sentries. Topographical charts became his canvas, patrol patterns and weak spots marked with crimson. He pinpointed watchtowers, calculated kill zones, scrutinized the compound's power source. His apartment morphed into a command center, papered with photographs and schematics. A familiar intensity settled over him, a frigid, deliberate focus banishing the lingering specters of his past. Then came the armory. He needed precision, efficiency, lethality. 0.0 margin for failure. He paid a visit to the Weaver, a shadowy figure in the city's underbelly reputed to procure anything. No questions entertained, Statham itemized his needs. A silenced 45 Hong Kong dollars, a compact breaching shotgun, flashbangs, smoke grenades, and sufficient C4 to collapse a bridge. Though he hoped to avoid such extremes, the Weaver arched an eyebrow, then simply nodded, vanishing into the warehouse's labyrinthine depths. To be why the following dawn, the weapons arrived, impeccably cleaned and oiled. Statham devoted hours to dismantling and reassembling them, his movements flowing with expertise. Each component was an extension of his will, a tool sharpened for a specific task. He executed dry fire sequences, his motions precise and inaudible, a deadly ballet of conditioned reflexes. He needed to disappear. The jungle demanded camouflage. He procured lightweight, breathable attire in subdued earth tones. He mastered the local dialects, rehearsing phrases until they echoed with native inflection. Even delved into the region's flora and fauna, identifying toxic vegetation and perilous wildlife, knowledge that could prove invaluable insurance. Sleep was a forfeited pleasure. He ran on. Caffeine and adrenaline, fueled by a singular, unyielding objective: to liberate those doctors' visions of their faces. Weary, afraid, yet resolute, ignited his determination. He pictured them huddled together, clinging to hope amid unimaginable peril. He wouldn't fail them. He packed his kit. A combat blade secured to his calf, a GPS beacon secreted in his boot, a comprehensive first aid package containing everything from antibiotics to sutures. He verified his gear meticulously, obsessing over every detail. Each click, each snap, each whispered rustle of fabric was a harbinger of the inevitable. Silhouetted by the lamp's glow before the map, Statham traced the path of infiltration with a steady finger. The jungle guarded secrets, dangers festered in the shadows. But he was primed. He was a phantom, a hunter, an elemental force. And he was coming for El Serpiente. Into the jungle. The air hung thick and heavy, a damp blanket woven with the scent of decaying leaves and unseen blossoms. Statham moved like a phantom, each footfall deliberate, his weight distributed to avoid snapping twigs or disturbing the leaf litter. He traded his tactical gear for locally acquired earth-toned clothes, blending him with the deep shadows of the jungle undergrowth. A flash of movement caught his eye: 2 cartel soldiers, heavily armed, patrolling a narrow track. Statham melted into the darkness, becoming one with the tangled vines. Patience was a weapon, and he wielded it with practiced ease. He waited until they were almost upon him, their coarse voices echoing through the humid air. One coughed, spitting on the ground. Disgusting. When they passed, Statham emerged, soundless. He moved with the speed of a striking viper, disabling the first guard with a swift chop to the neck. The second barely had time to register alarm before Statham silenced him, a garrote wire tightening around his throat. He dragged the bodies into the dense foliage, concealing them from casual observation. The jungle swallowed them whole. Inside the compound, Dr. Elena Rodriguez dabbed at a festering wound on a young boy's leg. The meager supplies were dwindling fast, and the stench of infection was a constant reminder of their desperate situation. "Almost done, Chico," she murmured, her voice soothing. "Just a little bit longer." As she worked, her eyes scanned the room, cataloging details: the position of the guards, the layout of the makeshift clinic, the faces of her colleagues. Beneath the surface of her calm demeanor, a plan was taking shape. "Elena," Dr. Ramirez whispered, approaching cautiously. "Did you see what they brought in this morning?" "Another shipment of supplies." His voice dripped with bitter irony. Elena nodded grimly. "More drugs, more weapons, and more mouths to feed. We need to move soon." "But how?" Ramirez asked, his eyes filled with doubt. "They've doubled the security." "We find a way," Elena said, her voice firm. "We have to. These people are counting on us." She glanced at the patients, their faces etched with pain and fear. "And frankly, I'm tired of being a glorified nursemaid to a bunch of murderers. She continued treating the boy's leg, her movements precise and efficient. Maria, she called out to a young nurse, can you fetch me more bandages? And check on Senor Garcia. He's been coughing all morning. As Maria hurried away, Elena subtly slipped a small, folded piece of paper into her hand. It contained a crude map of the compound, marking potential escape routes. Maria, a bright and resourceful young woman, understood instantly. Later that afternoon, El Serpiente himself appeared, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He surveyed the clinic with a disdainful gaze. Are my men being cared for adequately, Doctora? He sneered. Elena met his gaze without flinching. We treat everyone to the best of our ability, senor. But our resources are limited. See that they are not. El Serpiente growled. My men come first. Remember your place. He gestured to his heavily armed guards, a silent threat hanging in the air. I expect loyalty. Disloyalty will be punished. He turned and strode away, leaving a palpable tension in his wake. The guards remained, their presence a constant reminder of their captivity. Elena watched him go, her jaw tight. The noose was tightening, they had to act, and soon, the faces of her patients, the trust in their eyes, fueled her resolve. She would not let them down. She had to believe that Statham, wherever he was getting closer. Their lives depended on it. And even if he wasn't, she and her team would forge their own path to freedom. They had to. Betrayal and hope. The makeshift clinic reeked of antiseptic and something feral, crushed jungle foliage ground into poultices. Elena Rodriguez meticulously cleaned the putrid gash on the boy's calf, her focus absolute. At a deep, resonant drumming pulsed up through the packed earth floor, a constant, throbbing reminder of their gilded captivity. She stole a glance at the caged window, the sodden air clinging to her like damp grave clothes. Their plan, forged in the crucible of shared fear and burgeoning resentment, had once seemed so sure, so within grasp. Now, a cold dread snaked around her heart. Doctora Rodriguez. El Serpiente's voice, like the rasp of a file on metal, shattered the fragile stillness of the infirmary. A moment of your time. He blocked the doorway, flanked by his ever-present shadows, two hulking guards, silent and watchful. His gaze, obsidian hard, offered no solace, only a hunter's hunger. Elena straightened, meeting his eyes with forced composure. What do you require? I hear rumors, he murmured, his tone velvety with menace. Grumblings of discontent. Talk of flight. He advanced, the cloying sweetness of his cologne, a jarring intrusion on the clinic's sterile atmosphere. You disappoint me. Doctora, I extend sanctuary. Provide the means to practice your craft as this my reward. Elena stood her ground. We are healers, not chattel. A mirthless chuckle escaped El Serpiente. Chattel? No, no. Guests, and unappreciative guests, suffer consequences. He inclined his head towards his men. Double the vigilance, no movement beyond authorized zones without explicit sanction, and Doctora Rodriguez. He leaned close, his breath a frigid whisper against her cheek. I would deplore any misfortune befalling those closest to you. As El Serpiente departed, the weight of his threat suffocating her, Elena glimpsed Ricky Alvarez shrinking against the back wall. His eyes wide with apprehension, he instantly looked away, melting behind a hanging sheet. Later, Statham, posing as a fresh arrival, was assigned to the medical bay, lugging supplies and scrubbing floors. The air crackled with barely suppressed anxiety. He observed Elena. Her face was a landscape of worry. He also noted the heightened security. He needed to make contact. And quickly he found Ricky sequestered in a supply closet, stacking bandages, his hands visibly trembling. Everything all right? Statham asked, his voice low and even. Ricky recoiled. Startled, he met Statham's gaze, his eyes darting around the cramped space. I'm fine. Just busy. Heard about the discussion with El Serpiente. Statham pressed, casually leaning against a stack of crates. Doesn't strike me as a reasonable man. Ricky swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He is Dangerous.it is wise to remain unseen. Maybe. Or maybe it's time to push back, Statham countered, gauging Ricky's reaction. Fear mingled with something else in Ricky's gaze. A nascent rebellion. He hesitated, then spoke in a lowered voice. I never wanted this. I studied medicine to save lives, not to mend wounds for criminals. Then help me, Statham urged, his tone sharp with purpose. I can extract everyone, but I require information. Where are the vulnerabilities? Ricky wrung his hands, his knuckles white. I don't know if I can. My family. Think of the patients, Statham insisted. Think of Elena. They deserve liberation. Your family wouldn't want you existing like this. Ricky closed his eyes, his face a battleground of conflicting emotions. Finally, he inhaled deeply and confessed. The perimeter is weakest on the eastern flank, bordering the river. The guard presence is minimal there, and El Serpiente. He maintains a routine. Each evening, after the meal, he retires to his private chambers to entertain a guest. His guards are always on edge at that time, but it's predictable that it's the only moment he is truly without company. He paused, his voice barely audible. There is also a generator building near the rear of the compound. Cutting the power would unleash pandemonium, but it is heavily defended. Statham nodded, filing away the information. This is valuable, Ricky. Precisely what I needed. He gripped Ricky's shoulder. You're taking the correct action. Ricky looked up, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. I pray so, he whispered, his voice shaking. I just hope we all survive this. Assault on the compound. The generator shed dissolved in a thunderclap, plunging the compound into near-total black. The gloom flickered only by meager kerosene lanterns dotting the yard that a wave of screams surged. A tidal panic of voices laced with dread. Emerging from the jungle's embrace, Statham flowed into motion. A predator unleashed at a smaller, surgical detonation ripped the night near the main gate, pelting the guard post with shrapnel and slamming the two sentries to the ground. Before they could orient themselves, Statham descended a furious dance of honed brutality. Two muffled reports, the glint of steel, and they were silenced. Their watch ended permanently. Inside the makeshift clinic, Dr. Rodriguez flinched as the reverberations shook the very foundations. What was that? She questioned, her voice strained. Ricky, bent over a cot where a young boy's leg festered, jolted as though struck. His fingers trembled, betraying his unease as he struggled with the bandage. I don't know, Doctora. The military, maybe? His voice cracked, echoing his apprehension. He'd heard the grim folklore of army incursions. The chaos and cruelty they unleashed. Dr. Rodriguez dismissed his hope with a shake of her head. No soldier's work, too precise, too targeted. Peering through a chink in the corrugated iron, she observed the escalating bedlam, the rising shouts now punctuated by the dry rattle of automatic weapons. This is our moment. We have to move, quickly. Statham was a wraith, a ghost dancing through the disarray. The deactivated CCTV cameras, a midnight act of rebellion, left blind spots in the security. He now systematically engaged the outer guards, diverting their attention from the compound's heart. One man against many. A storm of controlled fury, each motion, each calculated shot, rang with grim purpose. The courtyard transformed into a killing ground. Cartel soldiers, ripped from sleep, poured from their barracks, weapons spitting. Lead Statham answered with focused fire, slipping through the pandemonium, using upturned drums and stacked crates for sanctuary, an artist of adaptation. He weaponized their own environment. Terror etched itself on Ricky's face. He glanced from Dr. Rodriguez to the suffering boy, then back at the escalating maelstrom outside. Devotion to his community, to the life he knew, fought with a newfound responsibility, an ember of fortitude he'd never recognized within himself. Doctora, he stuttered. Where can we even go? To the river, she stated, her gaze locked on the erupting chaos. There's a narrow path behind the kitchen. Our best chance to slip away unseen. She rallied the others, murmuring instructions, her steady demeanor a bulwark against the surrounding frenzy. Statham, pinned behind a toppled jeep, unleashed a volley of shots, felling two more adversaries. He knew annihilation was impossible, but he could weave enough confusion for the doctors to break free. That was the paramount objective. Taking a measured breath, Ricky reached a decision. The boy's fevered eyes seemed to silently implore him that he couldn't remain paralyzed. I know the route, he declared, his voice gaining strength and assurance. Follow me. He guided them from the clinic, their small cluster huddled tight, hearts drumming a frantic rhythm. They moved swiftly, hugging the shadows, staying low. The sounds of the firefight grew louder. A deafening symphony of destruction. Statham pressed his relentless assault. Absorbing the cartel's might, he gambled everything to buy the doctor's passage. He knew the odds were overwhelming, but he wouldn't yield. He represented a force for decency in a world consumed by corruption. Ricky steered the medical personnel toward the kitchen. A stray round cracked the air inches from his ear that he recoiled, yet pressed forward. His fledgling resolve hardening with each stride, he had shed the skin of a terrified boy now. He was a pilot, a guardian, a beacon kindling in the encroaching darkness. They gained the relative sanctuary of the kitchen as the warfare surged, the stench of gunpowder mingling with the stale aroma of flatbread. Their escape was underway. Redemption. The air pressed down, a miasma of fuel fumes and palpable fear. Statham ghosted through the compound, the silenced pistol a natural extension of his hand. The orchestrated bedlam served its purpose. Each detonation, every volley of gunfire, a thread pulling El Serpiente's venomous coils away from the clinic. He anticipated the warlord's presence. The confrontation was a bitter necessity, almost a hunger. He discovered him at the compound's core. A crude command post hacked from a fortified shipping container, framed by the crimson glow of emergency lamps. El Serpiente stood in the entrance, a cobra tattoo rippling across his bare, scarred bicep and startle. No flicker of surprise crossed his face. I wondered when you'd grace us with your presence, Senor Statham. El Serpiente's voice rasped, like stone grinding on stone, in his hand, a gold-plated sidearm, the safety already snicked off. You've become a rather significant irritant. That was the intention, Statham countered, his tone even, devoid of warmth. You believe you can dismantle my creation. El Serpiente's lip curled. This transcends mere narcotics, that its dominion, that it's ordained. It's a gilded cage, Statham retorted, advancing. And you're its prisoner. El Serpiente barked a harsh, humorless laugh and discharged his weapon. The projectile whined off the container's steel skin. A hair's breadth from Statham's temple, without hesitation, Statham dropped and rolled, seeking sanctuary behind a barricade of stacked crates. The air now stung with the sharp bite of cordite. The ensuing firefight was a savage dance of lead and reflexes. Statham leveraged the environment. The crates, the concealing shadows, weaponizing the confined space. El Serpiente, consumed by fury, bellowed commands at his dwindling forces, but panic reigned, and they fell with pathetic ease finally. Only they remained. Statham materialized from the gloom. His pistol unwavering. The warlord stood, chest heaving, the gold-plated gun trembling in his grip. Blood bloomed on his shoulder, his eyes reflecting a volatile mix of rage and dread. This doesn't need to conclude here, Statham urged, his voice laced with a surprising gentleness. Surrender your hold. Relinquish it all. El Serpiente spat, a globule of disdain hitting the ground. Never. He leveled his firearm once more. Statham responded with a single shot. Precise, lethal. El Serpiente collapsed, the gaudy weapon skittering uselessly beside him. The crimson light pulsed, casting the tableau in a morbid theatricality. El Serpiente's reign concluded. The evacuation proceeded apace. Statham secured the perimeter, relaying coordinates to the inbound helicopter. He located Elena supervising the loading of the injured. Her face, though drained, was set with implacable resolve, her eyes burning with fierce determination. They'll all recover, she affirmed as he approached. Because of you. Merely did what had to be done. Statham demurred, discomfort evident. It transcended duty. Elena insisted, closing the distance. You risked everything for us. For strangers, you're a man of exceptional courage, Mr. Statham. Valor is irrelevant, he responded. Averting his gaze, he felt the weight of her scrutiny, probing beyond his carefully constructed facade. Perhaps, she replied softly, But empathy isn't. I witnessed it in your gaze. Thank you. She reached for his hand, her grip firm and surprisingly reassuring as the helicopter ascended, its thunder echoing in the humid night. Statham watched it recede into the darkness. His objective was complete. The medical staff were secure. The cartel was decimated. He pivoted and vanished back into the shadows, toward the solitude he unconsciously sought. He didn't know what awaited, but a return to his former existence was unthinkable. The experience had irrevocably changed him. That he discovered a small clearing near the river, the same waterway that had drawn him into this nightmare. He settled onto a mossy boulder, the only sound the soft susurrus of the current. He closed his eyes, the recent days replaying in his mind's eye. The terror-etched faces of the villagers, the cartel's casual brutality, Elena's unwavering commitment. He had brushed against death, encountered unimaginable cruelty, yet had also found evidence of hope, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. That he remained uncertain of the future, but his purpose had been redefined. He had unearthed something within that jungle, something he believed he had forfeited forever. A reason to persevere. He was no longer the same man who had arrived. The jungle had stripped him down, forced a reckoning with his buried demons, and, in the process, offered a fragile possibility of redemption. The path ahead would be arduous, but for the first time in a long while, Jason Statham felt a spark of optimism, an opportunity for renewal. A chance to finally discover a measure of peace.